They stole my career, my money, my life. I'm a monster.
The movies are truly on a generational run these days. So far, 2026 has been a great year for the horror genre, but we've also gotten some great superhero films along the way. Now that DC Studios has finally released the most awaited trailer for Clayface, it seems like we're finally getting the first R-rated body horror film of the DC universe. I guess the studio really does need this pick-me-up after how Supergirl turned out at the box office. And seeing the trailer, all I can say is, Clayface doesn't just lean into the body horror surrounding its titular villain, but rather it embraces it in the most unsettling way. Given it's the first horror movie that's part of Gotham's world building, Clayface is set to release on the 23rd of October, and will follow the tragic fate of rising Hollywood star Matt Hagen, who's played by Tom Rhys-Harries. Apparently, Clayface falls between two Batman films from 2022 and 2028, which is directed by Matt Reeves and stars Robert Pattinson as the Caped Crusader. It's also set in the same universe as the Penguin, so honestly, the entire film will surely be overridden with iconic Easter eggs, some of which we already see in the trailer itself. Having said that, let's discuss every Easter egg, hidden detail, or theory we have about Clayface.
Even if he kills me, I'll be better off than I am now.
Clayface depicts the tragic downfall of a rising actor. By the looks of the new Clayface trailer, I guess we can be sure that DC Studios will not be treating this movie as a simple Batman villain origin story, as it's clearly being positioned as a full-blown body horror tragedy around Matt Hagen, a successful actor with a very bright career ahead. He's truly famous for his looks and has been living a rather privileged life, until of course he pissed off the wrong kind of people who end up attacking him one night and mutilate his face out of retribution. Just like that, Matt loses everything. His career, his fame, his money, and his normal life. The entire trailer simply descends further into the grim body horror-infused downfall of Hagen's tragic transformation into the monstrous Clayface, after he volunteers himself for an experimental treatment that could possibly allow him to fix his disfigured face and get his life back. In fact, we see him wearing a transparent rubber mask to hide the mutilation before he undergoes the human experimental procedure that can help him reclaim his Hollywood good looks. Even if it seems like the surgery is initially a success, it ends up making Matt's body and face completely malleable, and eventually his skin starts turning into actual clay, much to his horror. Unfortunately, the entire thing backfires as he turns into a revenge-filled monster named Clayface, who's now rising against the system to avenge himself against the people who betrayed him and robbed him of his chance to have a successful life. Even the justice system had failed him, and that further motivates his dark descent as one of Batman's famous villains, Clayface. The film is supposed to explore the deeply psychological themes of identity, vanity, toxic love, and the consequences of unchecked scientific ambition through Matt Hagen's physical and emotional deterioration, as he's slowly corrupted by the darkness that the scientific procedure unleashes within him, leading his primal instincts to irrevocably change him forever. This low-budget DC body horror is spearheaded by some brilliant minds. In case you didn't know, Clayface actually begins as a Mike Flanagan project, the horror master who brought us The Haunting of Hill House, The Fall of the House of Usher, Midnight Mass, and Dr. Sleep, among other creepy delights. Apparently, Flanagan was inspired by the two-part 1992 Feet of Clay episode in Batman the Animated Series, which inspired him to create a film that combined body horror with a tragic thriller. In fact, DC Studios CEO James Gunn and Peter Safran loved Flanagan's pitch so much that they brought the movie into their rebooted DCU. Even though Flanagan had to bow out of the project due to his scheduling conflicts, you know he's a busy man these days. But James Watkins stepped in as director. Gunn has said the final script retained Flanagan's original story, with Hossein Amini doing some rewrites on the screenplay. The film will feature the origin story of the Matt Hagen incarnation of Clayface, introduced to the DCU in the animated Creature Commando series, which was voiced by Alan Tudyk. According to Watkins, the screenplay explored questions of humanity, how we lose our humanity, and what it means to be a monster. But the real kudos go to Mike Flanagan, because according to James Gunn, he never expected to make a Clayface movie until Mike turned it into one of the best scripts he ever read. Moreover, Peter Safran also mentioned how Clayface will exist in the DCU, unlike, say, Matt Reeves' The Batman or Todd Phillips' The Joker films, which exist outside of it. According to both Gunn and Safran, it was important for Clayface to be part of the DCU, as it's an origin story for a classic Batman villain we want to have in our world. Clayface might not be as widely known as the Penguin or the Joker, but his story is equally resonant, compelling, and in many ways more terrifying than either of those. Gunn has also assured us fans that the film will feel totally real, and will be true and psychological and body horror and gross. Either way, Matt Hagen's transformation, starting from his face and body to his soul, turns him into the vengeance-seeking villain of the film's title, and given the talent involved, it could surely be a surprise Halloween hit. Naomi Ackie's Caitlyn Core is the scientist who sparks Matt's transformation. So Dr. Caitlyn Core, who's played by Naomi Ackie, is another major hidden piece of the puzzle in Clayface. The trailer presents her as the scientist who gives Matt Hagen the experimental serum after his face is destroyed. However, she's not simply a benevolent doctor trying to help him, as Core runs a struggling nanotech company, thus suggesting she may have professional, financial, and scientific reasons to take a dangerous risk with Matt's condition. That makes her role potentially much more complicated than a standard mad scientist character. While it seems like her treatment might save Matt's appearance temporarily, we know that it's what triggers the mutation and turns him into Clayface. The trailer starts with Caitlyn's hand injecting a bright pink serum into Matt's cheek, just beneath his eye and near the wound seen in the earlier shot, and it's all just downhill from there. For all we know, this controversial scientist is often compared to Elizabeth Holmes, and believed to be Matt Hagen's love interest. In fact, an interesting clue also appears in the film's marketing, where a mock cover of Gotham Medical Magazine features a doctor named Caitlyn Core, describing her as the new face of regenerative medicine. The cover hints that she's a leading expert in cutting-edge medical research, with stories about the future of organ transplants and tackling airborne diseases in Gotham's massive urban environment. These details suggest that her work goes far beyond treating injuries and may play a key role in Matt's transformation into Clayface. The serum that turns Matt into Clayface is also different in the movie. As you know, Hagen was the victim of a gruesome crime after his face was mutilated by gangsters. When he volunteers for the human trials at Caitlyn's lab, we realize that the doctor only wants to see what has become of him and asks him to remove the mask. She wants to know what he wants in return for her help, and his answer is simple: he wants his life back. Yet fans of Batman know that he won't achieve that particular dream, but he will instead become a nightmare for the Caped Crusader and the citizens of Gotham. But what Caitlyn Core can offer Hagen is a state-of-the-art, highly dangerous experimental operation that could restore his good looks, or something else entirely could result, which, sadly for Hagen, is precisely what happens. Initially, the operation seems like a success, as Hagen's movie star looks have been returned, but Core is clear that she has no idea what comes next. There could be unintended side effects where your face could become grotesquely malleable, but she has to say nothing about the psychological fallout. Well, when Hagen's face starts to change on a flight, we can all assume what happens next, and oh, is it definitely gross. Having said that, Caitlyn, who runs a company working in nanotechnology, tries to help Matt fix himself, both on the inside and the out. Given that it's an experiment, both of them take a leap of faith, and that's how their relationship crosses over into rather interesting territories. While Caitlyn's use of nanotech to fix Matt symbolizes modern science's promise and peril, it also offers hope for restoration, which the actor desperately needs. In fact, the trailer also includes several shots of Caitlyn working on a laboratory, and in one scene, she's looking through a microscope, while nearby monitors display close-ups of cells. We also see another screen showing the words "nanocell infection" alongside a 3D scan of a human head, with veins spreading across the face. These details suggest that whatever Caitlyn is researching goes far beyond conventional medicine. I think that the pink serum she injects into Matt's face contains some kind of engineered microorganism or nanocell, designed to regenerate damaged tissue. Caitlyn likely believes it will repair his horrific facial injuries, but instead it begins behaving like a living organism that spreads through Matt's body and gradually transforms his flesh into the clay-like substance that eventually becomes Clayface. That idea would fit perfectly with the film's official synopsis, which hints at the dark consequences of unchecked scientific ambition, rather than relying on magical or supernatural explanations. Clayface seems to be leaning into medical science fiction. In recent years, pop culture has become increasingly fascinated with fungi, parasites, and evolving microorganisms. Plus, DC has explored similar ideas when the Penguin featured the bleeding tooth fungus, which was harvested to create the psychedelic drug Bliss. With that in mind, it's surely possible that the substance injected into Matt is another experimental biological organism, rather than the traditional chemical serum we saw in the comics. Apart from that, the fake Gotham Medical Magazine shown in the marketing may also hint at the bigger picture. Alongside its feature on Caitlyn's regenerative medicine research, the cover mentions airborne diseases affecting Gotham's growing population. Those headlines could be subtle clues that Caitlyn's research, Matt's transformation, and whatever biological threat is spreading through Gotham are all connected and form the primary mystery of the film. As Matt's condition worsens, the trailer begins showing his body changing in increasingly disturbing ways. One shot shows him smiling at his reflection through a window, before his face suddenly starts melting. The practical makeup effects look remarkably convincing, emphasizing the horror of watching his features slowly lose their shape. While Clayface is famous for his full-body transformations, the trailer deliberately focuses on his face. That choice makes the horror feel far more personal, since Matt is an actor whose identity and career have always depended on his appearance. Every glance in the mirror becomes a reminder that he's losing the very thing that once defined him. Later, Matt is seen sprinting down a Gotham alley, which appears to take place after he flees the film premiere shown earlier in the trailer. Another unsettling shot occurs shortly after his experimental procedure, as his nostrils have been sealed over by the strange flesh-like material, while the skin covering his mouth begins to split apart, creating an image that strongly recalls Neo's mouth sealing shut during his interrogation by Agent Smith in The Matrix. To further add on to that, the trailer also briefly shows a sample of flesh-colored clay resting on a laboratory dish. We see that as heat or some other form of stimulation is applied, the material begins moving on its own. In fact, its behavior resembles living organisms observed under laboratory conditions, as well as the strange flowing movement of non-Newtonian fluids. That sequence reinforces the idea that whatever has infected Matt is not simply mutating his body, but it may actually be alive. If that theory is correct, Clayface's transformation won't just be the result of a failed medical experiment, but the consequences of a living biological organism that develops a will of its own inside him. There's clearly a convoluted love triangle brewing. So, Max Minghell's character will play the Gotham City police detective John Perlman, who's the film's relatively honest, straight-arrow detective in a corrupt city. While the trailer's inclusion of a Gotham detective gives the film a crime thriller element alongside its body horror, it also creates a likely conflict between Matt's increasingly unstable behavior and the law. Perlman is engaged to Caitlyn Core, which further creates a very complicated love triangle between them. That emotional connection may explain why Matt's transformation becomes even more volatile, because in the trailer, Caitlyn asks Matt to keep a hold of his anger, so my guess is, the angrier he becomes, the more connected to his primal instincts, and by extension, that becomes the catalyst for his ultimate transformation. Having said that, another possibility is that Caitlyn begins the film as Matt Hagen's ex-romantic partner. However, after Matt's devastating accident, where he makes the mistake of getting involved with the girlfriend of a local crime boss, leads to them getting connected again. But given that Caitlyn is now dating Gotham City police detective John Perlman, who couldn't do much when it came to seeking justice for Matt, spearheads a lot of bad blood between the two. Either way, the love triangle would be undoubtedly intense, even if Perlman is portrayed as an honest detective trying to do the right thing in a deeply corrupt Gotham. I think the way Matt, Caitlyn, and Perlman's lives would become intertwined will form the emotional heart of the story. The film's depiction of the villain is an amalgamation of all versions of Clayfaces within the comics. So the comics have two majorly infamous Clayfaces. The first original Clayface was Basil Karlo, who debuted in Detective Comics issue number 40 back in 1940. Unlike the versions that came after him, he had no superpowers when he first appeared. In fact, Karlo was once a famous horror film actor whose career collapsed as Hollywood moved on without him, and when he learned that his most successful film, The Terror, was being remade with another actor replacing him, his already fragile mental state simply shattered. He got so jealous and obsessed that Karlo stole the costume of the movie's villain, who was also named Clayface, and then began murdering everyone involved in the remake. Rather than being a monster made of living clay, he was initially a mass serial killer, but Batman eventually exposed and captured him, thus establishing Clayface as one of Gotham's earliest theatrical villains. However, years later, after the post-crisis era, Basil injected himself with blood and genetic material taken from Preston Payne and Sandra Fuller. That experiment transformed him into a genuine clay monster with complete shape-shifting abilities, thus allowing him to become the ultimate Clayface. From this point onward, Basil became the version most of us recognize today, as a towering, nearly indestructible shapeshifter, capable of forming weapons, mimicking other people, regenerating from damage, and altering his size at will. Then we have our titular villain of the film, Matt Hagen, who first appeared in Detective Comics issue number 298 back in 1961. Unlike Basil, Hagen was never really an actor, but just a greedy treasure hunter and adventurer who searched the world for forgotten riches. One day, while exploring a remote cave, Hagen discovered a mysterious pool of radioactive protoplasm, and during a confrontation, he fell into the strange substance, which completely altered his body at the molecular level. Instead of killing him, the protoplasm transformed him into living clay, giving him complete control over his physical form. With his new abilities, Matt could reshape himself into virtually anyone or anything. He could stretch, flatten, liquefy his body, impersonate other people perfectly, create weapons from his own flesh, and even survive injuries that would kill ordinary humans. However, the early stories established one limitation, where he periodically needed to return to the protoplasm pool to maintain his powers, before the stories evolved to expand and modify his abilities. Unlike Basil's revenge-driven personality, Hagen embraced crime because his new abilities made him feel unstoppable, and that's how he became one of Batman's most dangerous Silver Age enemies. In fact, From the looks of it, I think the film's Matt Hagen is an amalgamation of both of these characters in terms of their origin story and how they receive their powers. In fact, I think just like the comic iteration that initially relied on protoplasm, the movie's depiction of Clayface might just have to go back to Caitlyn from time to time in order to fuel himself up with the pink serum we see in the trailer. Gotham is a character in itself, so the trailer's Gotham City imagery is itself a major DCU Easter egg. This movie is expected to provide one of the first live-action looks at Gotham within the new shared DC universe. Even though Batman does not appear in the trailer, Gotham's presence matters because Clayface is traditionally one of Batman's most important enemies. The movie therefore seems designed to introduce the city, its police department, its corruption, and its criminal underworld before the DCU eventually brings its version of Batman into their larger storyline. Gotham is portrayed not just as a backdrop, but as an oppressive force influencing characters' actions and psyches. Having said that, one of the easiest details to miss in the Clayface teaser is a brief glimpse of a sign for Amusement Mile. It only appears for a split second, but longtime DC fans will immediately recognize it. In the comics, Amusement Mile is one of Gotham City's most iconic locations and is closely associated with the Joker. But that doesn't necessarily mean the clown prince of crime will appear in Clayface. Even if the amusement park actually seems to be operating in the trailer with its bright neon sign still glowing, it's often depicted as abandoned or run down in the comics and other adaptations. So what if the Joker never shows up? The reference is still significant. It confirms that Clayface is embracing Gotham's established history rather than using the city as a generic backdrop. Another quick shot reinforces that idea by showing the Narrows, which is one of Gotham's most recognizable districts. Originally created for Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins, the Narrows later became part of DC Comics canon, and has since remained an important part of Gotham's mythology. These references also suggest that Clayface will be more connected to the wider DC universe than some fans initially expected. Like I previously said, James Gunn has revealed that the project wasn't part of DC Studios' original slate, and only moved forward because he was so impressed by Mike Flanagan's pitch. That surely led us to wonder whether the film would simply be a standalone horror story with a little connection to the broader DCU. That surely led some of us to wonder whether or not the film would simply be a standalone horror story with little connection to the broader DCU. However, the trailer's deliberate nods to Gotham landmarks and lore indicate that Clayface is firmly set within the shared universe and could help lay the groundwork for future DCU stories. Well, that brings us to the very end of the video. What do you guys think will happen in Clayface? Will it just be an origin-motivated film for the villain? Let us know your thoughts and theories in the comment box down below.